Recording.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. And I'm going to start sharing my screen and see how that goes. So, Lindsay, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see the screen.
All right, thank you. So, hello, everyone. I want to just start by getting to know a little bit about who's in the room. So, if you can put into the chat what's your name and your farm, and then answer the question, is your crisis plan written down with a yes, somewhat, not yet, or what plan? And there's absolutely no judgment there. And I need to be able to pull chat back up. So while you're all entering those in, as Lindsay said, today we're going to talk about crisis management and emergency planning. My name is Stacy Stearns. I'm a communications specialist with University of Connecticut, or UConn Extension. So you're at a Cornell Cooperative Extension webinar. You probably already know what Extension is and does. UConn Extension is very similar. We've got over 100 years experience. Connecticut, smaller state than New York, but all 169 of our municipalities have extension programs in them. So thank you to all of you who are putting your names in the chat. And it's okay. A lot of people don't have plans. That's part of why we're doing this today. Keep going. So, a little bit about my background. I grew up on a dairy farm here in Mansfield, Connecticut. We're about 5 miles from the main campus. I'm part of the 10th generation. Our family farm is Mountain Dairy, and we are a producer processor. So, we've been bottling and delivering milk since 1871. This past fall, we started ice cream. Because we've seen fluid milk consumption going down, so similar to a lot of you that are expanding your operations, diversifying. People are drinking less milk, but they're eating more cheese, yogurt, ice cream. So we decided to explore ice cream because we've already got that built in. So we're about 1,000 acres, 768 of those are preserved farmland. And so I have the farm in addition to or with my family in addition to the role at UConn. So today's presentation, we are going to talk about the purpose and why it matters. Why should you even be worrying about crisis management and emergency planning? Then we'll go through some of the planning strategies that you can look at. We'll talk about responding in real time, the best practices, the do's and don'ts, and then we'll have time. Trying to leave a bunch of time at the end for Q&A, but I'll also provide my email address so if you want to follow up with me afterwards, and can give Lindsay some other resources to share with everybody too. So our purpose. Most of you probably already have a farm safety or a food safety or both plans as part of your operations. Um, We hope so. If not, please work on those. We want to encourage you to work on those as well. But the emergency planning and the crisis management should be part of those. And what we're really looking for in this is that all of them work in concert together, that it all works together to make your farm as resilient as possible. Um, so, crisis communication, crisis management, emergency planning, that can be part of your farm safety, but this is thinking about it holistically. So my background is in communications. I have a master's in agricultural education and communication. So I come at it more from the communication side, which you're going to see heavily throughout this presentation. But communications is such a big part of everything you're already doing, from your farm marketing to your employee management, volunteer management, however big your farm is. It also needs to be part of that emergency management and the planning. So there's other types of times when you have crises and emergencies. One of the main reasons that we talk about this is it can lead to economic losses and closure on your farm, which none of us really want to have that. But it's also a bigger reason. The purpose for us talking about it is bigger than that. You want to be a good neighbor. You want to be a good member of your community. You want to share your farm and have people enjoy it. So that's also why we do it. But we also want you to stay in business. We don't want you to suffer any economic losses or have to close your business. Um, I'm sure you've all heard the cliche before, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so that's, again, why we're doing this, the purpose of these webinars and the other training materials that are available, preventing an issue or crisis before it happens. Having that emergency management plan is the best way to recover quickly to avoid these altogether. So when we're talking about it today, we're going to focus a lot on those that are weather related, injuries, visitor caused things, whether somebody trips and falls or whatever it is. Force majeure is another reason why you might have a crisis or an issue. And then there's the liability derived ones. And often those come from either when you haven't attended to something on your farm that should have been attended to, or um, you know, whatever the situation is around that. I'm not a legal expert. I'm a communications person, so encourage you to talk to a lawyer, an agricultural lawyer, and or your insurance agent with any of those types of questions that you have as well. So this should just be really a session where you can get more information, figure out what you already have, what you want to put into place, and then keep working on it and diving deeper in and making your farm resilient. So I use these words interchangeably. I'm going to keep doing that throughout our session today, but wanted to just go over it at the beginning, issue versus crisis. So an issue can lead to an incident, can lead to a crisis, can become a disaster. Issue is the smallest on our spectrum, and a disaster is the largest on our spectrum. So think about a minor incident issue versus an ambulance on site incident slash crisis versus media attention, which could be crisis slash disaster. So I can give a personal example. We had a visitor at our creamery this fall who uses either a walker or a cane, depending on the situation. When she visited us, she chose her cane, even though her walker was in the car, and headed back to her car after enjoying her ice cream. She tripped and fell, cut her head open, had a concussion. We ended up with an ambulance, got her cleaned up and taken care of, and it only ever was an issue. But in other cases with other customers, that could have become an incident or a crisis if it hadn't been addressed. So that's kind of where we're looking at the spectrum, and we can go into that more at the end if you have more questions about what's an issue versus what is a crisis. Get PowerPoint to keep going with me here. All right, so this is just for reflection. You don't need to put it into chat at all, but what would close your operation for the season if it happened today? So think about what kind of an issue or crisis could happen on your operation and cause you to close for the season. And maybe not today as you're getting more snow, or maybe the snow is the thing that would close it. Just let's take a few seconds and think about that. So for some of you, this might be weather. It could be that visitor injury, could be animal or livestock issues, whether they're getting loose in the road and causing havoc. It could be an infrastructure problem. And we had problems years ago here in Connecticut where snow load on barns collapsed a lot of, well, not just barns, it collapsed a lot of buildings. And we've seen some of our greenhouses and high tunnels in the state already cave in and collapse again this year. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we're going through the rest of the presentation today. So I want to talk a little bit about why preparation matters. Agritourism is growing in the Northeast. I know you've all been seeing it here in New York, whether it's your own operation, whether it's those of your neighbors and friends. We've got it in Connecticut as well. We've got a really large population density, which is great. As far as agritourism goes, we're diversifying our farms because of those weather-related incidents and other reasons, but that also increases our exposure to risk. So all those types of crises that we were thinking about in the previous slide and our reflection from the weather to the injured guest can happen at an operation. So we're going to kind of go through this session with four parts: that overview of the different types of crises. We're going to talk about the factors to consider, what that plan and framework should look like as you're making a plan and trying to really get your operation as resilient and possible. And then those best practices that you should really consider adding one of those to your operation or making some changes. Um, so just some kind of startling slash sobering statistics. 75% of small businesses don't survive a food safety outbreak. And then 25% of businesses don't reopen after a weather-related disaster. We've already seen examples of this. Lindsay and I have a friend that we work with in agritourism from the Dominican Republic, and she shared an example from one of their resort areas. And this is more of a resort area, but it could happen, anytime there's a bus tour. They had near Punta Cana, which is the big resort area in the DR, a bus accident where 5 people were killed. They didn't actually have any staff from the tour company on the bus that crashed. It was a multi-bus um, tour. And so something happened with staff. There was no staff on there. There was all of these miscommunication, we'll call them, because that's definitely what they were, incidents that just kept aggravating that further and further. And it went from, that was already a really big incident when you have people that badly injured, but it turned into even more just because of the missteps that were made. A more local example for you, there's probably a lot of pumpkin patches in Michigan, but there's one in particular. It's on the National Ag Law Center. It's a case there. In October 2020, they had a visitor, and one of the things they've got on the farm, some of you may have these on your farms, is those tires where you can jump from tire to tire, just like kind of a fun game area. A visitor broke their ankle. One of the tires was soft, went through the tire, and ended up breaking their ankle. They sued the farm for damages. The farm had to then defend itself. And the last time I was checking that case out on National Ag Law Center, which I haven't checked it recently, but even without seeing where it's at now with the multiple appeals and everything that farm went through, it's a very costly incident for them. So other things could be your illnesses. Again, those, um, whether it's food safety or otherwise, data breaches. So many of us are using Square or some other software to collect payments on our farm. There's all sorts of things that could cause you to really need a emergency plan or crisis management. So thinking about it broadly, we look at our planning strategies. We start with identifying our audiences. This probably includes the audiences that you're already working with on your farm. You know who your guests are, you know who your target audience that you're marketing to is. That's your audience. But you may also want to, well, I know you also want to add your other audiences to this, whether they are your neighbors, your vendors. Sometimes vendors are coming on and off the farm, and got a friend with a bridge to her farm, which I think is the coolest thing ever. I've always wanted a bridge to my farm until it floods so bad and the bridge goes out or the bridge isn't sound. And then she's got to work, had to figure out how to get people on and off the farm that way. Your other partners might be other agritourism operations. If you're part of a trail or anything like that, your local audiences that way. So you want to really think about all those audiences, not just your customers. This photo here is from a farm that, well, they've got two farms, one in Connecticut and one in Rhode Island, the Wicked Tulip Farm. And they have this cadre of seasonal employees. I think they have some volunteers too, because anytime I go to their farm, you just see those orange Wicked Tulip shirts everywhere. They've got to communicate with all those people. Last year during one of our torrential rainstorms in the spring, they had to close down the farm, and then they had so much tulip damage. So that was an audience for them to communicate with all those employees. Then we need to create plans for potential situations, both emergency plans and communication plans. And again, these plans should all work together, be part of the same document, and have different facets, one for the emergency side, one for the communication side. They should all be connected. Again, I'm not an insurance agent, so you're going to review this with your insurance company, with your agent, have them out. You want to determine your legal responsibilities, knowing those before an incident. And then again, if something happens, is really important. And then you can build those relationships with community partners and leaders so that you have them when you need them. You have that support system in place. So, for example, for our farm, we've got our regional tourism through the state of Connecticut tourism office. We've got our town's economic development commission and our economic development office, who's always really eager to help support us. We've got, local volunteer firefighters. All of those different groups can be really impactful. And then, of course, you've got your extension system. You've got people like Lindsay who can help you. Finally, you want to practice because you're not going to remember in real time, and a plan that just sits on a shelf really isn't useful at all. You need a plan that you're aware of enough that you know the basics of, that when something happens, you can put it into play and just work the plan without having to find it, without having to refresh your memory. So we're going to use our chat feature again, and I want you to type into the chat, what's the most likely crisis your operation could experience? So we'll give you a couple minutes here. Just think about it. It could be something that's already happened, something that keeps you up at night, something that you've seen happen on another farm that you really don't want to have happen to you. So let's add a few of those into the chat. So we're a dairy farm. One thing I worry about is the cows getting loose and causing an accident because they've been loose before. We've got somebody putting in chat a visitor getting injured from one of the animals. That is definitely a concern. We had, you mentioned horses in your post. We had a case here in Connecticut where a kid got bit by a horse at a farm, and that was really not. It ended up being a state case and a lot of issues. Ice presence is definitely one that I think is on a lot of people's minds. Yeah, those injuries, the livestock losses, trespassing is a big one. We want people on our farms, but only on parts of our farms and when our farms are open. And that's a fine balance that we all have to walk. So let's just keep those things in mind along with your reflection from the beginning of our session as we continue going through the rest of the slides. So our planning framework doesn't need to be that complicated. You can keep it pretty simple, and there's 6 things that I'd like to see you include if you don't already have a plan, or if you have a plan, we just want to go back and make sure that these are in them. So you need to assess the risk. You've already started doing this today with your reflection and then the things that you've put into the chat. So ideally, there are so many things that could happen, and we all have probably run through them. We've had a couple barn fires already this year, just in this state, and that's been on my mind a lot lately. As you see another one in the news. You don't need to have an exhaustive list. Your plan doesn't have to include every possible scenario because it'll be demoralizing and overwhelming. Pick 3. Pick the 3 that are most likely, or the 3 that keep you up the most at night, and think about those and assess your risk for those. Then you want to identify the audiences. This is where we went back with that example of the tulip farm, all of the employees, your audiences that are already, the customers that are already coming to your farm. If you do school tours, whoever those are, so you get your 3 potential risks, then the audiences for those risks. And then the communications person in me wants you to create your message templates. These aren't the messages you will use verbatim when something happens. These are templates that you can say, okay, I identified this risk of a person breaking their ankle in my apple orchard. If that were to happen, here are some messages that I would potentially use. Now, the situation will hopefully not happen exactly as you envision it. Hopefully, it will not be as serious, but you would be able to go back to those messages and tailor them to the specific situation, and it'll be a lot easier than trying to respond in real time as everything else is going on. So then you want to assign roles in a spokesperson. Depending on the size of your operation, you may have many of those roles because if you're a smaller operation, there aren't as many people to share these roles. We'll go into the roles a little bit more deeply in one of the upcoming slides. You want to identify those communication and management channels. So you've already probably got your farm social media. You may have an email list. You may be text messaging to your customers through an app or some other system. So you want to look at those. This is where those partnerships that you make in advance are helpful too. You might have media partners, um, reporters that you can reach out to and help them get your story out there in positive times, but also when there's an issue or an emergency to manage. And then you want to integrate your plan with your safety and continuity of operations, your business continuity plans. So they should all be part of the same holistic plan, working on making your farm more resilient. So, just to kind of build off on that planning strategies, those 6 steps, um, I've spent a lot of time, probably not as much time as I would have liked or could, but in the adventure tourism realm. And Lindsay and I were talking before the rest of you hopped on the call, about skiing. And so she's big into skiing. I've been big into whitewater kayaking and rafting. And I'm also an equestrian and have ridden horses all over the world. So agritourism and outdoor recreation, adventure travel have a lot of similarities. The equipment, the animals, the uneven terrain are just the simple way of putting it. But I've seen through various travels the good and the bad ways to handle different issues and emergencies as they come up. We had a kayak slash raft incident in a very remote section of Peru where one of our people broke ribs, and then, you know, trying to figure out how to keep going on this self-supported trip with one injured person. We had a hurricane come through and take out our entire camp basically in Dartmoor, England, and just, put everybody into tents and hunker down and get the horses somewhere safe as the remnants of a hurricane came through, people injured, falling off horses. So you can kind of see, and you can probably think of parallels from your own life of where things went well and where they didn't, and use those as you're thinking about your own examples, the own risks that you're worried about for your farm. Again, I'm the communications person, so I'm going to tell you that good communication is part of the guest experience. And you know that from your signage, your advertising, the directional signs on your farm so that people can find the variety of apples they're looking for, or, whatever it may be. That needs to be part of your emergence. That good communication that you've already established on your farm needs to be part of the whole process, your emergency planning, your crisis management as well. You probably already know this from your marketing, but simple messages work best. And then that training and preparation, practicing those communication methods, practicing the plan, they will help make sure that you don't add to the problem by not addressing it correctly or having blunders as you go through the process. So you want to assign roles and responsibilities. Lindsay and I were at a conference last year in Scotland, and we came across this sign. I'm pretty sure she has the same exact photo on her phone, but you want to really work on mitigating your risks. So you get basic first aid training for all of your employees. Then you have a first aid kit available at various parts of your farm. Everybody knows where it is, and we've made sure that it's stocked. Um, you have that signage that's telling people where they should go, where they shouldn't go, what the dangers are. You want to identify roles and responsibilities. You want to assign a spokesperson. Again, when we get to our incident command system, we'll go into some of those different roles and responsibilities a little bit deeper. But if something happens on your farm, if you've got the person with the broken ankle, you shouldn't have all employees talking to everybody about it. if the media comes, there should always be that one consistent spokesperson. It will probably be those of you that are here today, or, your spouse, your business partner, whoever that is. You want to develop those management and communication plans for your three scenarios so that you can adapt them as needed. You develop your key messages and supporting information ahead of time. And some of that may be understanding what your insurance covers. And if something happens, being able to say to the person as they're getting loaded up into the ambulance off your farm, look, my insurance agent is going to contact you. This is what we have in place and how we can help support you. Talk to your insurance agent before you do that, but having that good relationship with them ahead of time and being able to call them or text them and say, hey, this just happened. What do we need to do next? We talked about XYZ will be so helpful. You also need to plan for if you or one of your staff gets hurt, especially if you play one of those critical roles in your system. Um, how can everybody else, that continuity of operations, how is everybody going to keep going without you? Does everybody know what happens next and just continue with business as usual? So here we go with our incident command system because I've referenced it a couple times already. This is a light version of it because you don't necessarily need a whole incident command system for your farm, but there are parallels in it. There are lessons that we know from it that can really be helpful on your farm. So you need an incident lead. That's probably you. You might have several of these roles depending on the size and scope of your farm. You want a communications lead. Who's going to be handing out those messages? Your employees are going to get questions, or your volunteers, your family members, after something happens. You want to be able to have those messages already drafted up and share those with people so you can say, if somebody asks, here are the messages that we are sharing. You want to have a safety officer. You should have somebody, you probably have a designated food safety person on your farm already. Are they going to be that safety person who's looking at how sturdy the stairs are, whether the tire in that pumpkin patch is getting soft and liable to have somebody fall through it? And then you want a guest liaison. So we welcome the public on our farm. So that guest liaison, that customer experience is already important to us. And you want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in the rest of the incident. When I was giving those adventure tourism examples earlier, you have one person that gets injured falling off a horse, but you still have 18 other guests or however other many guests, and you need to ensure that the rest of those guests are still being cared for, are still having a good time while they were taking care of that one person that was injured. So thinking through all of those, having your plan in place, that's really what we're going for with these plans. And that's where your incident command system will be helpful too. You can change the name, um, you know, just have a conversation over dinner, however it works for you. So I want another reflection question. And if your business is not open in October, pick a different month. But who fills these roles on your farm on a Saturday in October? And you can consider your family members, any seasonal staff, and volunteers. And once you've thought about who fills these roles, I want you to think about what happens if that person is injured or not at the farm for some other reason. So I'll give you a few seconds here to just think about that and jot down some notes. Okay, so you can keep writing down your notes, keep thinking about it. And again, we encourage you to keep working on this well after this webinar is over today. Next, we're going to talk about crafting our messages. So these are templates that you'll be able to use and adapt to the situation that happens, to whatever that issue or crisis is. You want to be able to think about several of them. You're looking for messages that are clear, that have actions that provide updates. If it's written communication, you're going to want those timestamps in there. If it's documentation for, if it's messages for your insurance agent or somebody, those timestamps are also important. We always want to have concern and empathy for those affected in our messages. That should always be first and foremost. Our messages should lead with our values. You've probably already done some sort of values statement or exercise for your farm, for your operation. So those values should also come through in your messages here. And we also want to avoid speculation. I've got two examples here on the screen, a bad one and a good one. So our bad example is we are investigating an alleged incident that may have occurred. Um, that is just not good on so many levels. The alleged, I think, is the one that always gives me the fingernails on chalkboard feeling. The better version of this same premise, the same type of message it's trying to convey is we're aware of an incident involving a guest. Our priority is their well-being, and we're cooperating with emergency responders. So that is showing that concern and empathy. And that one could be what you have as a template and, just have that written down and you may need to adapt it. It might be an incident involving, you know, say one of your animals gets hurt and people see it and so they're worried about that. You could adapt that message to various situations. We're aware of an incident with our road and are, cooperating with um, emergency responders to find out when we will be able to when they'll be able to reopen the road and regain access for people to our farm. Whatever that may be, you can adapt that, having that. And that's one example, but you'll need multiple messages because the communication needs to be ongoing and it needs to be consistent throughout. So those are all things that you can think about and work on drafting. Once you finished moving snow, when you don't have guests on your farm, this is a good season, unless you're a winter farm, for us to be doing some of this prep work, getting us ahead and ready for the busier times. So responding in real time, this is, preparation is great, but then all of a sudden the plan needs to go into action. This is when we're grateful that we have a plan. And I'm going to keep on this point, it was on the previous slide as well, but people first is really how we need to think about everything we do. We care about the people first, our employees, our guests, our customers, our neighbors. We need to put people first in everything that we do. And that's part of our crisis management and emergency planning is making sure they are all set before we move to the next step, whether that's communication, whatever it is, we're putting those people first. We always want to do our due diligence, our signage, whether it's for, the dangers of a Scottish Highland cow or whatever else it is. You want to do your safety talks. This should be safety talks with your employees, but it should also be safety talks with your guests. You want documentation. So one of the things that we recommend, and a lot of our insurance agents in Connecticut for farms here recommend, is having an incident response form, because I'm not always going to be everywhere on my farm at once, and neither are you. So you may have an employee who witnesses or is there when something happens. You may be off the farm. You want them writing everything down. What time of day did it happen? What was the weather like? Were there any conditions? For example, was it rainy or misty so the stairs were slippery when the person tripped and fell? Were they wearing like flip-flop type sandals and the flip-flop bent forward and contributed to the fall? All of that information can help you, especially because and I'm not as familiar with New York state statute and law, but in Connecticut, people have a year or 2 years. They have a long time before they can in order to bring a lawsuit or decide to bring a lawsuit. So the person that got injured may not cause problems for you, be of a lawsuit mindset, but their family members, a lawyer catches up with them. So something could come back 8 months, 10 months later to you, and you're not going to remember that specific incident because so many things have happened on your farm. So having that documentation so that, that incident form so that you can go back and look and say, okay, this is what happened, jog your memory on the exact specifics, and being able to provide that to your insurance agent, and worst case scenario, a lawyer, is going to be really helpful. And then you also want to have that training for your employees. Obviously, it's a plan. You need to be able to adjust as needed. The communication often and early with your internal and external audiences. there's a sequence for communicating that really, when I say early and often, it's acknowledging, it's assessing the situation, acting, updating, and then closing it out and moving on. That clarity and consistency are going to help reduce your liability exposure. And finally, we go back to that people first always premise. You want to follow up with those that were affected and the community, um, because we care about the people, we care about being good neighbors and a part of our communities. So the basic best practices that we like to share are integrating the crisis plan with your farm safety and your business continuity planning. We've kind of stressed that point multiple times today. It's so important for all of these to work together in order for you to be as resilient as possible and as prepared as possible. Again, that preparation and prevention are your best step to avoiding crisis and for emergency planning. We're practicing that due diligence. We're using the pre-approved messages to avoid hesitation. And by pre-approval, I'm talking about like we've talked about it as a family. We've talked about it as the group of partners that own this business, so that everybody's on the same page. And we know that if something happens, these are the types of messages that we're going to share. You want to know your guest skills. This is more pertinent if you have farm stays or you have guests there for an extended stay. Having somebody who's a guest that also has medical skills or is a medical professional is helpful, especially if you've got a 10-day farm stay or you're doing something along those lines. If it's people at your farm for a 2-hour U-pick, it may not be as necessary for you to worry about that one. You want to have those community partners you can rely on for assistance. And this could even be other local farms. We're all already really good about stepping in and helping each other. And just having that as part of our network is so important, especially when an emergency of some sort happens. You want to review your plan yearly and after every event or any event. Things change on your farm. You add a new aspect. You decide to plant tulips and have the tulip fields open for a couple weeks in the spring. Whatever it is, if you're not looking at that plan and reviewing it annually, you're probably also not ready to put it into play if something happens. So just keep looking at it. Make sure it's not something that's sitting on the shelf collecting dust. And then tabletop exercises can be really helpful for you to imagine what happens. I've seen some farms who, if you've got kids and they've got the toys and you've got the toy barn and the animals and everything, they can literally set up a tabletop on the kitchen table, on the dining room table with the toys of, okay, here's the barn, here's where the hay wagon goes to take people up to the apple fields. And then you can role play what those 3 scenarios are that you're worried about, sitting around the dining room table figuring out how you would handle it if it happened. And that's basically what a tabletop exercise is. If you don't have kids' toys or if they won't share, you can just draw it out on a big piece of like flip chart paper, so that you can look at it, look at that aerial of your farm, and then talk through how you would handle each of those scenarios. And we'll kind of look at those. Maybe what we'll do is I can let you guys unmute and we can talk through them at the end here. So one more reflection question for you. Actually, there'll be 2 more or 1 more after this, but which of the best practices we went through are you not doing and want to add? The premise of this is that one change this year will reduce your risk more than any checklist will. So I can give you all sorts of resources and incident response forms, but if you actually make a change, that will be better than, me sending you a bunch of materials. And I can go back to that slide. So you can just, maybe I can go back. There you go. Look at these best practices. Which one of these can you incorporate on your farm that you're not already doing? Okay. So, the do's and don'ts. I guess it's presenting your plan do's and don'ts. I don't know why I put presenting there, but meanwhile, the do's. We want you to adopt a safety first philosophy. We want you to plan for emergencies and disasters. Write that plan and practice it. We want you to train your employees and make sure everyone is prepared. So it's not good enough for just us to be prepared. Our whole farm ecosystem needs to be prepared. Work with your insurance agent, consult a lawyer if you have one or feel that that's needed. Develop an incident reporting process. Again, everyone needs to be aware of it and, working on that. It doesn't help if something happens on my farm and I show up 2 hours later and say, oh, you need to write all that down. That person who's writing it down has probably already forgotten some of those key steps. So it really needs to be ingrained their in their mindset that as soon as this happens, I need to write it down. And that just becomes part of what they do, like washing your hands when you go back to work. Um, and then you want to designate one spokesperson for your farm. Again, might be you because you're already here, you're leading your farm. The things we don't want you to do: don't wait for an emergency to happen to prepare. Don't ignore the warning signs. If there's a soft step on the stairs that go up to the hay wagon, just take care of it now. It could save you a lot of headache and hassle now. We don't want to panic, and if an emergency happens, you see this if you are friends with any first responders, people like that, you know how they stay calm under pressure. So not all of us have that innate ability. It's something we need to practice, but it's worth practicing because it's really important to stay calm when something goes wrong. You don't want to rely on memory. That's why we practice the plan. We review the plan. You're not going to remember what's in it if you write it and then set it on a shelf and forget it. You want to communicate. You don't have to worry about over communicating. In a crisis or emergency, you've all seen this. People appreciate that extra communication, but you also don't want to overshare details. No speculation. You want to make sure that it's accurate and people don't need to know everything. And then we want to think about our seasonal risks as well. We've got one, that we're all dealing with right now. If your farm store or whatever is still open, you may need to be worrying about ice. So make sure that ice on your driveways and walkways is part of your plan. So here are some mini tabletop scenarios. These are three that I picked. You could pick a different one for your farm. And I think what we'll do, because you're only in chat right now, and I appreciate those of you who put right into chat what you were going to adopt from your best practices, you know, the signage, the biosecurity, creating and reviewing a plan. So these three exercises could be things that you're worried about, or you could pick one yourself. And we'll wait, and I can bring these scenarios back up after during the Q&A. But the guest breaks an ankle on uneven ground. I was thinking about the either the person with the gash and concussion at our farm or the Michigan pumpkin patch example when I came up with this one. But for a lot of us, this seems to be a concern. The severe thunderstorm hits during a corn maze. If you don't have a corn maze, you could think of some other severe weather. If you're open during the summer, you know how fast the weather can change sometimes. And then a foodborne illness is reported via social media. Social media, we haven't talked about a lot today. We can talk about it a little bit more during the chat at the end or Q&A, but there's so much of your reputation management that is outside of the scope of your control, a lot of that through social media. So this is something that you want to be concerned about on several aspects. First and foremost, the foodborne illness and making sure that whatever is going on there is attended to, but also your reputation management with social media. So the discussion questions that go along with this, and if as you're working on your tabletop exercise on your own farm with your family partners, whoever is involved in your operation, who communicates first and to whom? What three key messages will you give? And how do you document the incident? As you're doing the tabletop, before you even get to those discussion questions, you might also consider what happens first? What do I do first? So say we go back to that first one. A guest breaks an ankle on uneven ground. let's go back to our you pick apple orchard. If they're out in the apple orchard, it may be an employee or another guest who's telling you back at the main farm that somebody's out there in your apple orchard with a broken ankle. So what's your first step? Do you have radios, cell phones that you can figure out what's going on? Do you call the ambulance first? Um, does the guest have small children with them and a second driver? You need to think through all of that. So those are all things that you should be working out, thinking about, talking about in your mini tabletop scenario. And then our final discussion point in the mini tabletop, something could have a good dinner table conversation around what not to say or post during the first hour. So we gave you that example earlier of a bad message. Think about what the other bad messages might be for your mini tabletop scenario and what you don't want to say if this were to happen. So our last chat storm for today is on commitment. I want you to please type one thing in the chat that you're going to do in the next 30 days. So we had your best practice, but is there one other thing that you can do in the next 30 days? And maybe it's that soft step on the stairs up to the hay wagon. It's the no trespassing sign or the no public access sign for a certain part of your farm. This could be something small in addition to that best practice that so many of you already put into the chat. Oh, somebody's getting a first aid kit. I love it. We found out the hard way recently that we hadn't restocked our first aid kit when one of our milking cows bought bit our herdsman, and I had to run all the way up to the office to get him Band-Aids. That is not ideal. So we ordered new Band-Aids and made sure that barn first aid kit was restocked. Signage is another good one. So keep putting those into the chat, making those commitments. We want to see your farms resilient and successful. And this is more of a heavier topic, but we are not trying to scare you. So there's my email address. Please feel free to reach out afterwards, or if I can answer any questions. We've got a template of that incident response form that we've shared with farmers here in Connecticut. I can share that with Lindsay if all of you would like to see it as well. But really appreciate that you joined us today and are taking the steps to make your farm more prepared in the event of an emergency or crisis. And Lindsay, I can stop sharing so they can